I'm Roberta Glass, and you're listening to my True Crime Report. Today I have a very special guest on, Ken Kratz. He's the former prosecutor of Calumet County, Wisconsin, and made most famous by appearing in the Netflix series Making a Murderer, which has now been viewed by over 40 million people since it appeared on Netflix in 2015. As we record this, it is October 31st, 2019, the day of Teresa Halbach's murder, and I'd like to dedicate this episode to Teresa Halbach and the family and friends who loved her.
Thanks, Roberta. It's nice to be here again.
Thank you. So, what is the experience like? What happens in your house when Making a Murderer appears on Netflix and you decide to watch it? I mean, I can barely watch Making a Murderer. I find it so frustrating, especially Making a Murderer 2. I mean, how do you do that? Do you get popcorn? Do you watch it in pieces? I mean,
Making a Murderer itself, I haven't watched in probably a couple of years now. MAM2 I had watched this year in anticipation for writing one of the chapters of my book. Chapter 15 is called The Day the Circus Came to Town, and it, I think, accurately reflects my feeling of Attorney Zellner and what it is that she presented in Making a Murderer 2. You know, one of the things, Roberta, that I'm unwilling to talk about is Zellner's brief that she filed with the Court of Appeals. I'm not a lawyer. I don't hold myself out to be a lawyer anymore. And so any kind of legal analysis, I don't do really anymore. But beyond that, certainly my personal experience is what it is that I've seen, and my sense for all these things. As you know, I'm happy to discuss. I don't have any topics that I shy away from, and I try to answer things as honestly and with as much humility as I can. And so I'm looking forward to talking in a forum that I'm not rushed or that I can complete all of my thoughts. So why don't you go ahead? Let's start with some specific questions, and then that can maybe lead us into some other areas. So go ahead and shoot.
Okay, so when is Convicting a Murderer coming out?
I'm not sure. I had heard that it was going to be sometime early next year, perhaps as early as March, but I'm not involved in the production. I don't know what their schedule is. I participated in interviews with them, as has most of the people on the state side of the Avery case, at least as I understand it. And so I think, like everybody else, I'll be really interested to see it come out and see what it is that they do to rebut Making a Murderer. I'm hopeful, at least, that that's their goal. We'll see, though, when things actually come out in the early part of next year.
So true crime fans were treated to a little teaser from Convicting a Murderer where you debate, what would you call it, an Avery supporter? And,
sure.
And you say, I don't really see it as a debate. I see it more as an opportunity to educate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess what I inferred from that was that if you show people the facts, if you educate them, then they can really come to sort of more a logical conclusion. Is that true with everyone?
Well, here's what I've done in this case, and it's really different than the last time we talked, which is quite an epiphany that I had in looking at this whole thing. For me now, it's a matter of numbers. Okay, 40 million people watched Making a Murderer, and the number of people that I've reached, either through YouTube or through my book, are 8 people. So compared to 40 million. I am never going to make a dent in how people think or what they believe, any kind of confirmation bias that they have. And so I've spent this time, basically since Making a Murderer came out, trying to convince people. I've been trying to convince people that Making a Murderer, was a sham, that they had lied about all these things and treated these law enforcement officers really shabbily and didn't seem to care about the impact that they had on the people that were left in the wake of their entertainment piece. So now what I do is I announce as best I can the availability of information on the other side. I don't want people to believe a word I have to say anymore. I want them to look for themselves, because I have determined that it's not going to be me that changes people's opinion. It's going to be people like you, people like your listeners, maybe the documentary film industry, maybe pundits, certainly people other than Ken Kratz. I know how I'm viewed, Roberta. I know what a visceral reaction most people have to me. And I could sit here and shake my fist at the clouds and say it's not fair and I'm not that bad of a guy and people should be listening to me, but it's not up to me. It's up to everybody else. And so if somebody else would step up and say these same things, if some law enforcement would do it, if some attorney general from our state would do it, if the governor's office would do it, if somebody with the knowledge these guys are actually guilty would come forward and assist in the process of educating people, then I wouldn't look like such an idiot. I wouldn't be here shaking my fist as much, saying, and another thing, and another thing. You know, I'm like the drunk in the bar that's been reduced to shaking his fist at people and saying, and another thing, I want to tell you what happened. And I'm not doing that anymore. I'm tired of that approach. I'm tired of the reaction that I get from it. So now I state my truth. I tell people what I think. I tell them where they can go find the answers for themselves and invite them to do just that. And if they don't, if they continue to base their opinions and some really bizarre stances that they take based on what either they have watched in Making a Murderer or probably now more so the confirmation bias, mostly now just listening to themselves, just talking with themselves and saying, oh, here's what happened. Yeah, that's right. That darn Kratz or whatever it is they do on these discussions. Both sides have to be heard, I hope. And the availability that I've made my side of it, that is the case that I hope to bring to people's attention, is in my book. It's a short book. It is an easy read. It's the other side. And for all of the hours and hours that people that are addicted to Making a Murderer, or at least have done some research themselves or whatever it is, I think they owe it to themselves to read my book. At least know what the other side is, and then make up your own mind. I say it in my book. Don't believe anything I have to say. Here's what happened, though. Here's what the jury got to see. And then you can make up your own mind. So that's the new me, if you will, Roberta. That's what I'm here to present. And if people continue to dislike me so much that they can't stand to listen to anything it is that I have to say, or then pretend somebody else is saying it, okay? I mean, I'm asking for a friend. Let's put it that way. We'll be able to get to the issues themselves rather than this drum that continues to beat on what a POS Ken Kratz is, and that's getting tiresome, certainly for me, and I suspect for anybody else who talks about this case. Everybody knows my backstory. Everybody knows the challenges that I'm saddled with going forward explaining these things. But if your listeners are willing to understand that and understand that I'm doing, the very best I can to bring this information to the public, then hopefully they'll at least look at the other side and then make a decision for themselves.
Do you think there's anything about your character that makes you a particularly good villain for the Avery supporters?
Oh, yeah. My narcissism, are you kidding? My son last night was actually here, and we were talking about that because he has some of those same character traits that I do. And as my son puts it, my father is particularly fond of himself. Okay. And so for better or worse, I think driven people, driven elected officials, that are also lawyers, they're going to have a lot of those characteristics. Anybody who's driven is going to be very confident. You know what I mean? They're going to be very sure of themselves, and especially against Kathleen Zellner or against Jerry Buting. If you don't have that kind of bravado, if you don't have that kind of confidence in what it is that you're saying, you're going to be chewed up and spit out. There isn't any way you can compete in that arena if you're going to be a wallflower or just say, I hope they listen to me. So that's never been my personality. I've always been super confident. It's taken a beating. I mean, my self-image. I mean, there's much of my behaviors, especially in 2009, that were abhorrent. I mean, they just were not anything that I would ever have predicted that I would have engaged in, but I did. And so now I can, wither, and I can hide. I can stick my head in the sand. Many people have. I think all of law enforcement has, if you've seen that. They're not saying anything. They're hoping they don't get picked on like Ken Kratz is picked on. The Attorney General's office hasn't said anything. The persons who are now in charge of prosecuting this case, they don't seem to answer anything. I don't hear them answering, as an example, in 2011, why they released these bones to the Halbach family. And it's not for me to answer, it's for them to answer. And I haven't heard any answers. And so the fact that I'm apparently the only one that's talking, that I'm still the only one willing to stand up for Teresa, to stand up for the conviction, to stand up for the criminal justice process itself. People are stuck with me until somebody else sets aside this craziness, this embracing Stephen Avery in favor of some kind of a philosophy that he was set up again. I mean, ignoring that he's a misogynist, ignoring that he's a serial domestic abuser, that he hates women. Violence against women is well known with this man. He raped his niece. He raped his babysitter. This man is a violent, predatory individual, okay? So how does Making a Murderer, how do they paint this guy, or how do they present this guy as being not just tolerable, but likable? How do people that are usually supporters of, I don't know, let's say the Me Too movement, where violence against women and how people treat women, how you talk to women are so important, how are those supporters unwilling to listen to Avery and his jail calls when he talks to his girlfriend Jody and the vile, horribly violent things he says to her, or all of his background when he has beat these women and been engaged in this? How do they ignore all that, Roberta? I'm really, now this isn't even just a rhetorical question. I'm interested in what you think. How is it that they took what would normally be somebody that nobody, meaning that side, the Me Too side or the woke group, how is it that those people don't reject this guy and say, my goodness, you're everything we're against? So how does that happen, Roberta? What is it about Stephen Avery that is so attractive?
It's not just people. These are women filmmakers, women attorneys, women supporters. We're not talking about people. We're talking about women. And that's the question I ask all the time.
Stop. Women are people. I'm not.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying to differentiate what makes it for me extraly, as a woman.
Right.
And
that's what I mean, right.
So I want to differentiate, be really specific about what I'm talking about, right. Is that's what upsets me so much, is that these are not women who are speaking up for Teresa. And it's not just this case, it's other cases I deal with, Rodney Reed. Uh-huh. Women are so quick to come to the defense of a convicted rapist murderer. And Stephen Avery, with his long history of putting every woman he, practically knew in a battered women's shelter. And so I asked Lynn Hartman about it, because I think about it all the time. And there's this idea that sort of the state is the man, the big bad man. But the big bad man for women is a rapist, a murderer. I don't get it. And what she said was that they're not thinking that way. And I think that with Stephen Avery, he was really the face of the innocence movement. It was embarrassing for him. He was wrongfully convicted for this rape he got out. It was incredibly dangerous and raped and murdered Teresa Halbach. I also had an idea about what tremendous power to rewrite the whole story. And you have the power of myth, the power of fantasy, and you don't have to stick to facts. You can just make it all up. And what you did so well in your book was you took the whole conspiracy theory and you went through it sort of at paragraph 1 or 2. You're like, this is ridiculous. By the second page, it was so outrageous what would have had to happen to have a police conspiracy to frame Stephen Avery. Do you think that is true with this case, that the defense theories only work in pieces, separated from each other?
I think it's very true. And where it shows itself, Roberta, I think are on the new claims that are made. So like Kathleen Zellner, for instance, some of the claims that she's making, there's such a disconnect that's going on, the willingness to rewrite history. But things like chapstick was put on the bullet. Well, that's crazy. Nobody would believe that. The actual physical chapstick, which was put in police evidence and stayed there forever, how that chapstick was used as the thing to put on a bullet that wasn't found until March, until 4 months later. Well, how does that chapstick sitting in the police department, how could that have been used to put on this bullet? So The fact that people are they're really willing to set aside common sense. They're willing to do anything to suspend, really, common sense in favor of coming up with some version of events that would suggest that anybody other than Stephen Avery committed this murder. Now remember, they've started with police officers. They didn't plant anything. And when Kathleen Zellner's own expert said that the vial wasn't tampered with, when Kathleen's expert said the vial wasn't used as the source of blood, that it wasn't planted, at least based upon this, did you hear the apologies after that, Roberta? Did you hear the filmmakers say, I know we told you guys that these cops planted this evidence, and we'd really like to correct the record now that we know that didn't happen? I didn't see that. Maybe you heard from, let's say, Jerry Buting, who was willing on Making a Murderer to go on this docuseries and lie to 40 million people and say that there's this vial of blood in the clerk's office with a hole in it. And gee, Dean, I'll bet the cops went in there. That's nonsense. He knew by the time of trial that a nurse named Marlene Kranitz had put the hole in the vial of blood. She was ready to testify. He was so convinced that this tampering with the blood was no longer a viable defense that they didn't even bring it up in trial. So the fact that they abandoned this smoking gun, but they resurrected for Making a Murderer, saying, aha, this is it. This is how we know that they planted evidence. And what they did was they identified Jim Link as the cop. They said he had this position, that he was the overseer of evidence, that he had gone into the clerk's office, that he had filled out this transmittal form, that he had taken this vial of blood, that he had sent it to Madison, which proved that he had been handling the blood. And then after it was back, he knew it was there and he could go in and he could take it. Well, the filled out transmittal form, as I'm sure you know now, and hopefully your listeners know by now, had nothing to do with the blood, had nothing to do with the vial of blood in the clerk's office. That transmittal form was for fingernail clippings and hair that was sent. No blood. The blood was never touched. In fact, Jim Link testified in the trial and explained all of that and said, I didn't even fill out that form. I never touched that box. I never went into the clerk. I didn't even know the existence of this vial of blood until after the Avery case had already been charged. So when they know that's the fact, I'm talking about Jerry Buting now, if you're following along at home. Jerry Buting, where's the apology? You said that Jim Link was a crook. You said he was a criminal. You said he planted evidence and you showed us the vial of blood. Where's the apology? Where's the retraction? And from a Netflix standpoint, Netflix knew that this was all a lie right after Making a Murderer came out, right? I mean, Netflix heard from me and others that they spliced testimony, that they made it look like things happened that never happened in real life, that they had flat out come out and misrepresented things, yet Netflix allows it today to keep being shown. So the defamation against Andy Colburn and Jim Link and myself happens every day. Why haven't they fixed it? You know, I watched this Game of Thrones show on HBO, and I remember the last program, there was this big uproar about a Starbucks cup. By the next time it was shown, Roberta, HBO had fixed it. They removed this cup from their movie. Well, why in the hell has it taken Netflix 4 years to fix it? Fix it, Netflix. You know it's a lie. You know it's not a documentary. You at least know now where everybody suggests this splice occurred, or they made up this answer. I show you both in my book and in several videos of where this happened. So ask them why. Ask them why they haven't fixed it. Ask Jerry why he hasn't apologized, or Dean, or any of them. When they went out of their way to cast these people as villains, when they took their reputations from them, continued to smear them over and over and over, and even after the death threats, and even after they were forced to retire, and even after they were shunned from their communities, nothing by way of any kind of a remedy or any kind of consequence for their lying. They simply move on to Making a Murderer 2 and start the lies all over. Somebody's got to ask a question, Roberta. The documentary film industry or some place, they have to ask Laura Riccardi, why did you splice this in and make it look like it happened when it never did? Why did you lie to 40 million people? Her answer so far has been, well, it was an entertainment show. I never said it was true. Well, are you kidding me? If that's going to be your answer, if your answer is, yeah, we made stuff up, but we never said it was true, well, you got some splaining to do, lady. You got some splaining to do to 40 million people and 2 cops and 1 prosecutor whose careers you ended. That's my point on all this.
Well,
maybe that's too much, but they sit by like they can't do anything to fix it. Fix it! Take those lying things out of your show. It's still a good show, even without all the deception. And so you show it that way. Don't continue to this defamation against the people that you've cast as villains.
This is sort of you look at like the West Memphis 3 movie. I don't know how familiar you are with them, but one documentary points the finger at one grieving stepfather. Then the next one that comes out after that one points the finger at another grieving stepfather. And none of the convicted child murderer supporters say anything. Like, what happened to the other guy in the case of Teresa Halbach's murder? They accused her ex-boyfriend of committing the murder, and then just sort of they have amnesia, and it's just not important anymore. What I'm asking, I guess, is do you feel like we're reaching an age where sort of fantasy and reality are becoming true crime entertainment mixed so that these people aren't real people, or it doesn't matter, or it's just satisfies?
I'm really concerned about our country because, I watch the political arena as well as things in the legal field, and it seems like the truth doesn't matter anymore. It seems like people are willing on either side to present their narrative. Confirmation bias is that everybody just talks to themselves, right? And so there's no opportunity for conversation anymore. If I try to bring up a point, they don't just want to discuss they want to silence me, Roberta. They want to trash me. They want to call me everything but a Packer fan. And so it's my position that this has gotten really scary. This has gotten to the point where if the truth doesn't matter anymore, and if you're willing to ruin the reputations of police officers, prosecutors, and good people just doing their job, and you're supporting this, and you're on that side being an advocate for this kind of behavior or this kind of treatment of our law enforcement or our prosecutorial community, we're in trouble, Roberta. This is picking the wrong side of history in these cases to embed yourself or to embrace misogynistic, pathological killers rather than a poor 25-year-old photographer, a young woman who had no connection, no reason she should have been targeted and killed, but she was. And where's the sympathy for her? Where's all of the outcry for women, violence against women and domestic abuse? So I tend to keep saying the same thing over and over, but I don't think we can say it enough, Roberta, that people better start reintroducing themselves to their common sense. You know what I mean? We shouldn't just suspend common sense when we want to advocate for a position or we want to fight for a position. The ends don't justify the means. The means are really, really important. The process by which we convict people is really important. The fairness by which prosecutors give discovery and provide, all the information that I did in this case. Yet to attack me of all of the thousands of reports and video and audio and things that I gave the defense attorney because of some CD that ended up in some investigator's briefcase, Zellner claiming this is the worst Brady violation she's ever seen. By the way, on a piece of evidence that Dean Strang, the defense attorney, stipulated that he said there's nothing of evidentiary value here. Hey, guess what, Roberta? Dean Strang didn't want to go into that computer. There was a reason that Dean's client, Stephen Avery, told Dean, as we know, he's told many people on phone calls that we've heard about, that if they ever get Barb's computer, there's going to be trouble. There's stuff on that computer that are going to be, very damaging. Well, what did he tell his lawyer? What did Stephen Avery tell his lawyer was the importance, necessity that Dean Strang go try to seize this computer from Barb before the cops come and take it? There's a phone call between Stephen Avery and his sister Barb when Dean Strang is there. He's there the day the computer was seized. And Barb says, your lawyer's here. He was here to get the computer. Well, what the hell is that about? Hey, Dean, what did your client tell you? Why did your client not want that in the hands of the cops? You ever ask that question? You ever wonder why Barb erased files or deleted files before the cops came and got the computer? It wasn't to protect her son. It was before Brendan was even involved that this computer, that various files were erased so they couldn't see what was going on around the time of October 31st. So why did that happen, Barb? Who are you trying to protect? Who told you, by the way, who had the wherewithal, who had the computer knowledge, the savvy to know what kind of evidence could be found in a forensic exam and told you, you better wipe that evidence? And so when we learn why it was that Dean Strang went to get this computer, why it was that Stephen Avery was complaining or telling Dean from day one how important this computer was, yet these two attorneys now pretend they had no idea the importance of the computer or what was on it. They didn't even listen to them. They didn't even look. They just took my representation that there wasn't anything much of value on there, which wasn't my representation at all. This was a stipulation between the attorneys. And the last point I have on this is, why is it that Dean and Jerry, on all of these different forensic issues, when we told them what it said and we told them what it showed, they rolled up their sleeves, they got experts, they dug into why it was not true. Why not the computer? Why was he so willing to have nobody else take another look at that computer and just allow it to kind of go by the wayside? Those are the questions that somebody needs to ask Dean Strang or Jerry Buting or someone on that side. And if they're going to complain, if they're going to say, gee, we didn't know about it, or we didn't know about the computer's importance, or we were fooled by the prosecution, or such nonsense, then they better start being ready to say what their client told them. They can't any longer sit back and say, oh, that's privilege, that's confidential. Well, BS, okay? Because if you're going there on your client's request to grab that computer before the cops, he told you something, Dean. He told you there was something on there that he didn't want shown. Luckily, Barb already wiped it. Barb already deleted those files, anything that might implicate anybody else about this case. Somebody needs to start asking those questions, putting two and two together, and stop salivating over every word of Jerry Buting or Dean Strang or Kathleen Zellner as if it's gospel. It clearly, there's a lot more to this story than we've been told, and the unwillingness of the other side to tell us the whole story. I understand it. They don't want to tell us why and what it was that Steve told them, why it was that they didn't want to look into that computer anymore. But I'll bet you it wasn't nothing. I bet Dean didn't just go on himself the day the computer was being seized to try to get it before the cops got their search warrant. So those are questions that they need to answer, not me.
So I just want to go back quickly to one of the things you were saying before about how you feel that the truth doesn't matter and it's in our political system. And what I noticed about these sort of popular court cases, the defense is always attached to some kind of cause. So,
Sure.
Right. And in this is a little bit different, Stephen Avery case. It's more like a police conspiracy. And you had an interesting theory about why America was so willing to accept a police conspiracy in 2015 when this came out.
Sure. Well, you got to remember the timing of this. This was before the Donald Trump era. Okay, this was December of 15. So it's just before all Trump all the time, just before that. And if you remember back to that time, before it was all Trump all the time, it was all dirty cops all the time, whether it was in Ferguson or whether it was the Black Lives Matter group or any of these the cases. The sentiment in this country was at a fevered pitch, I would suggest, against police and against their investigative practices and in favor of some protected class. I say a protected class because normally the class that these advocacy groups rally around are minorities, or they may be women, or there's at least an identifiable protective class. You've taken a white male, misogynist, rapist, and you have made him part of your protect. What are you saying? That poor white trash is now targeted by cops? Well, that's exactly what they said. And here's my answer to that, Roberta. Stephen Avery spent $240,000 on his criminal defense. 240. I've been a defense attorney. I've been a prosecutor. I've never heard in Wisconsin for one case a defense attorney getting 240 grand. I've never heard that much money being paid. So if you're suggesting this guy is poor or he wasn't able to buy the very best defense, the very best lawyers, the very best that money could buy, then you're not watching. The fact that Laura Riccardi in her movie was able to suggest, well, poor people never get a fair shake. Well, Jesus, how much does he have to pay for his defense to get a fair shake? 240 grand doesn't do it. Then what is going to do it? I mean, other than, Bobby Durst or somebody like that, nobody's paying 240 grand on one case. And so it isn't just that they are presenting a narrative. It's so deceptive. It's so untrue. It's demonstrably false. Yet they have millions and millions of followers, of supporters that are willing to accept that rather than believing that the man who all the evidence points to actually killed this young girl. I don't get it. And I'm probably never going to get it, but I guess that's why I'm sitting here and they're all out there.
One of the more interesting parts of your book is when you discuss Brendan Dassey, and I hear all the time of the Brendan Dassey case that it was so thin, that it was a coerced confession. But you write that there was so much evidence against Brendan Dassey that you were worried that you were going to overtry him and that you, in fact, did not overtry him. What was some of the evidence you didn't use?
Everybody, and by everybody, I mean the general public, and most people, let's call it that, aren't aware that there were any other statements other than March 1st. Everybody's seen the March 1st videotaped statement of Brendan Dassey. They look at that. They look at a couple of clips that are put on Making a Murderer and think back based on that, based on what the television shows us, we can tell that this was a coerced confession, or what Laura Nyrider, she's taken the big leap here. She's now calling it a false confession. A false confession case. By the way, do you know why? Do you know why that word is used? Because she's piggybacking, in my opinion, on the Central Park 5 case. Netflix has now taken the recipe for Making a Murderer, and they've included it in this newer program about the Central Park 5 and how those were false confessions. Okay, so this is a term now that you are going to be hearing more and more about. This is where the advocacy groups really lie, is in the areas of false confession, especially of juvenile suspects. Okay, so that's the advocacy movement, let's call it, that we have for Brendan Dassey. Well, what they don't understand is it wasn't just the March 1st statement. Brendan Dassey gave 6 statements to law enforcement. Brendan Dassey made hundreds of phone calls on his jail line to his mom, to other relatives, to his friends. And by law, since the cops weren't involved in any of those conversations, they're not coerced, okay? So they are admissible almost, just because they are statements against his own interests. But all of those statements, and by the way, I've included just a handful of them in a new YouTube video that I had put out that talks about the Dassey Clemency petition. It was a YouTube where I addressed it directly to the Wisconsin governor, and I told him, he did it, right? And so I thought that because this train seemed to be leaving the station, because the Clemency train with Dassey was getting support from the likes of Kim Kardashian, or now recently I've seen the nun from Dead Man Walking. They're all signing up now
Sister Helen Prejean,
for Brendan Dassey to get out. Well, what the hell do they know about the case? After they've watched the full confession, after they've watched this kid in a narrative form say how he raped and how he participated in the murder and mutilation of this woman, then we'll talk, okay? Then we'll talk about clemency. And so in my YouTube, I just take 6 short clips and 1 phone clip. And I then challenge Ms. Nyrider and Mr. Driesen to say, is this what actual innocence looks like? You're claiming that he's actually innocent. That's why you get out. And so my position on the clemency, which is difficult because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not involved in the case. I feel responsible almost to say something because nobody else will. But whether Brendan Dassey gets out or not is not a concern of mine. I don't care if he's let out early. I've said for a long time he never should have gotten life imprisonment, and that Brendan Dassey has a lot of my sympathy. And Brendan Dassey got a raw deal. I mean, not just by his Uncle Steve, but by his family and everybody else who abandoned him. And I would even suggest we got to look at the lawyers at this time. Why is Brendan still in prison? Why didn't you make a deal? Why hasn't some deal been made yet where this kid is no longer in prison? I offered him 15 years in prison. By next March of 21, Brendan Dassey would be walking out of prison if he would have accepted my plea bargain, okay? But instead of that, his family conspires, Stephen Avery conspires. I would suggest Dean Strang with all of these, let's sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk. Those are meant to advise or at least suggest what Brendan should do in going to trial rather than taking a plea. If Brendan Dassey ever takes a plea, Roberta, there is no making a murderer. So even after Avery was convicted, and we offered virtually the same plea bargain to Brendan Dassey because we knew he never would have raped anybody on his own. He never would have killed anybody on his own. He was cajoled and he was invited to participate in these crimes by his creepy uncle. So recognizing that, even though we didn't need any testimony from him on the Avery case, we still recommended a very, very fair plea bargain. And Dassey's lawyer wrote me an email just before the Dassey case actually went to trial, talking about the offer that I had made, and said, because of Dassey's own family, they're not going to let him take a plea bargain. So that is the kind of admission, that's the kind of thing that you look at and say, well, who was on this kid's side? Who was ever on Brendan's side? Was his mom? When his mom told him, you got to talk to Grandpa? Grandpa wants you to call Tuesday, you got to talk to him. Well, you don't think Mom knows what that call's about? Grandpa's going to do the thing that Barb wouldn't. That is saying, don't take the plea bargain.
Yeah, you can hear it on one of your videos.
But it's right.
Yeah,
but it's well enough known by now that you got to ask Barb, what the hell were you doing? Why were you kind of serving your kid up to the grandparents who didn't want him to take a plea because it would hurt Stephen's case? You're sacrificing this 16-year-old. You're sacrificing his freedom. You're sacrificing his whole case so that Stephen Avery can still pretend that he's innocent. And here's the kicker. Even after Avery's conviction, Dassey can't plead guilty. Why? Because all of that nonsense then about planting evidence, all of the making a murderer bombshells and reveals all go away if Brendan enters a plea. Then we don't have somebody who's been wrongly convicted. Then we don't have poor Stephen Avery anymore. We've got exactly what we had. This is the guy who's responsible for the murder. This is the guy who's responsible for the rapes. And here's exactly what happened. Roberta, you would never have a making a murderer if Brendan Dassey was allowed to enter a plea. So what happens even after the trial? The case that's important is Avery's case, not Dassey's case. We're willing to sacrifice Dassey so Avery can keep pretending that he's not guilty. And from that perspective, it's heartbreaking. It's heart-wrenching listening to these conversations between this kid and the people that he hopes will give him good advice. The people he hopes, like his parents and his grandparents, and the people that you would hope would look out for his best interest. They're telling him, you don't want to get out with your whole life left and live your whole life free. What you want to do is go to trial on a confession murder case and take your chances there. Because the result, I think, at least I would argue, was certainly foreseeable. A confession murder case is probably going to be a conviction. The only sentence available in Wisconsin for conviction of first-degree intentional homicide is life imprisonment. You signed this kid up for life imprisonment when you told him you can't take this plea bargain. Well, that's unless I'm, looking at this wrong, or unless somebody can convince me otherwise, it doesn't seem like they're on Brendan's side. So my position is, I don't care if he gets out early. I don't care if the governor commutes a sentence or pardons him or any of those things. But you better know what you're doing, Governor, when you do that. If you're pardoning him because of something called actual innocence, then you're making a mistake because he did it. Lots of reasons why he did it, and there might be lots of reasons why he should get out of prison. but don't make it because of actual innocence. There's too much evidence. He pointed to too much physical evidence after the fact for anything other than believing that this kid, as you can see him saying on videotape, that he was involved. Much of Brendan's statements are what I like to call almost self-authentic. They have this ring of truth to them, all right? So it's things like, no, Steve, I don't want to rape her because I'm not old enough to have a kid yet. You know, it's the 16-year-old naivete that's speaking. It's got this ring of truth. You're telling me that the cops told him to say that? Are you kidding me? Or when he's asked, why did you rape her? And he says, I wanted to know what it felt like. Well, what felt like? Well, sex. Well, was that fed to him? You know, these things have such a ring of truth to them. And when you listen to them coming out of Brendan Dassey's own mouth, if you're the governor or if you're Sam from Poughkeepsie, you're all going to conclude the same thing, that this kid was there, this kid helped. And as heartbreaking and sad as it is, until something else happens with this case, he shouldn't be getting out anytime soon.
You know, you're much more generous than I am about Brendan Dassey, because I think I've told you the fact that he could get help.
I know.
It's just something out of my worst nightmares.
It's such a sad case when you realize when Brendan tells his mom, I was there before you got home. You know, Brendan Dassey calls his mom and says, she says, I was home at 5. When did you go over there? He says, well, I was there before you were there. And then we know he went there afterwards at between 7 and maybe 9:30 or 10, cleaning up. And all of that is admitted, the second half of going over there. But if Brendan Dassey was there before, if Brendan Dassey was there sometime between 3:45 p.m. and 5 p.m., which he says he was, he's never going to be able to claim that he didn't know what was going on over there. You went there twice. You went there because you knew who was there. Especially the second time, you knew who was tied up there. You knew who was there. So going over there saying, gee, I don't know what's going on, is something that nobody should believe if they have any kind of common sense at all. And so if he didn't go over there before 5 o'clock, why did he tell his mom that? Why would he tell his mom that he was there before and after? Well, of course, that doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't lie to your mom about this. That wasn't coerced, was it? Was that a coerced confession? And so when you realize he said all of those things, you don't ignore it. You don't put your blinders on. You don't put your head under the sand. You've at least got to suggest to yourself, well, this deserves a second look, or at least a look from the prosecution side for what happened, and not just accept, not just allow to be spoon-fed what it is that Ms. Nyrider, Mr. Dreesen, Ms. Zellner, or any of the others want you to believe. You better go find out for yourself what happened, especially before you sign some petition for Brendan Dassey, or before your name ends up being attached to, I think this kid is innocent because Laura Nyrider looks like a nice young attorney, and I believe her. Well, it better be for something other than somebody else told you that. You better find it out within the evidence. And if you look at my YouTubes or review my book, or you go find out for yourself, you're going to see, unfortunately, if you're a Brendan Dassey supporter and fan, that this kid was there, this kid did help, and this kid should have been convicted of being a part of the crime.
You also cite federal appeal judge Diane Sykes' opinion that the real goal of Dassey's attorney and her advocacy group was to make a new law so that could be used to change interrogations of juvenile offenders. Can you explain that?
Sure. It wasn't an opinion, by the way. It was a question that she had asked during the oral arguments, all right? So when what's called an en banc hearing was held, that is all 7 of the judges that were going to decide that case, instead of just the 3-member panel, which was pretty easy for Laura Nyrider, given that 2 of the judges were very liberal activist type judges. That wasn't the hard one. When all 7, though, of the judges had to listen to the oral arguments, they all got a chance to ask questions. And it wasn't going to go nearly as smoothly for Ms. Nyrider when others got to ask questions. And so I cited Diane Sykes, who was a former Wisconsin judge, when Judge Sykes asked specifically about the habeas corpus procedure, which is why they were there in the first place, when habeas corpus appeals by themselves, by definition, has to address existing law. Not what you want the law to be, but what the law is now. And applying what the law is now, could the state courts have come to the conclusion that they came to? Well, of course they could. This confession was considered by the circuit court at least twice, probably 3 times, by courts of appeals, by federal courts, by any number of opportunities to review it. And all of those courts have said that this was not a coerced confession. So when Judge Sykes asked, aren't you just trying to change the law across the country? In other words, if you come up with some new written decision here that says that cops can't talk to, let's say, juvenile suspects without a lawyer present, okay? That's what Laura Nyrider suggested. By the way, that helps out her advocacy group, her children's center, who she advocates for. It isn't just for Brendan Dassey. It's for all the kids. It's for all the juvenile suspects in the future. And those people that she cared about made her argue, or at least I'm suggesting, allowed her to argue that they should have lawyers with them. Well, Diane Sykes said, well, if by law you can't do that, by law we have to look at the case as it is and not change, the law in the future, isn't that something that's more important to look at? And I think I put in my book that as soon as I heard that question, I knew that Dassey lost the appeal. Because that was the question, because that's exactly what Laura Nyrider and her advocacy group was trying to accomplish. They wanted a wide, sweeping, written decision that was going to change the law, at least in the Seventh Circuit and maybe in the entire U.S. They had been advocating for lawyers or parents to be present during interrogations of juveniles. They forget, by the way, to tell everybody that Barb, the mom, was invited to sit through that very interview. And it was Barb that declined to sit through there. Well, Barb was there because she shows up right at the end of it. It's not like she's not there, or even her admission. Yeah, they invited me. I chose not to sit through it. Well, if a parent has to be present, what more are they supposed to do, Roberta, other than invite the parent to sit through? I mean, they have to make them sit through before they can talk to a witness? Is that the new standard she wants? So Judge Sykes made sure that didn't happen. Judge Hamilton, who wrote for the majority, made sure that didn't happen, noted that Dassey was well able to resist suggestion and that there was nothing coercive about this, that all the fear-mongering about the Reed technique and all of its evils, you should realize that didn't happen here. The Reed technique, they say, is bad because of the adversarial nature of it, because of the accusatory phase of it. Well, they never got to that here, Roberta. This was a soft interview. In fact, the first part of it, at least until 11:45 a.m., all of that was a witness, even a victim, a child victim interview. Let me just talk about this for just a second. I used to not only practice in this area with sexual assault of children, or at least interviewing child witnesses. I used to train how to interview and how to present child witnesses to other attorneys. But when I did that, there's a beginning part of any protocol that you use, whether it's stepwise or any of the others. That's an old word that some of your law enforcement people are at least going to recognize. But there's a beginning part that's called rapport building, okay? And it's to get the child that you're interviewing to trust you. What they train these guys in the rapport building, when somebody has seen something traumatic, when they have to use naughty words, as an example, when they have to talk about things that are, at least to them, so private and so shameful that what the police then in their rapport building suggest to the child is, it's okay. We already know what happened. And they say things like, your mom said that you were going to be truthful today. Your mom said that you would tell us the truth. It's okay, Brendan. Tell us what happened. We already know. Well, in that context, when you look at it with what it was, not an interrogation of a criminal, they didn't know Brendan Dassey was involved. They knew he saw something traumatic, and they know that he was really impacted by it. So when they are making these assurances to him, at least before 11:45, which is his first admission, when he first admits that he raped Teresa Halbach, was his admission at 11:45. Everything before that, Roberta, is under this category of a trauma interview of a child. When you make those kind of assurances, when you do those soft things, when you say, we're on your side, Brendan, when you even physically touch his leg or his arm, or giving him assurances that the bad words that you're going to use aren't going to shock us. In fact, nothing you're going to say today is going to shock us. Okay. So I hope, and I don't mean to delve way too deeply into today's conversation, but when you look at those assurances they made to this kid, it's what they're trained to do when they are talking to a trauma victim, to a child witness rather than a child suspect. You'll note, by the way, that after 11:45, in most part, that the questioning changes dramatically. They go through what's called the funnel approach. Again, for those of your people that have any kind of training at all in child interviews, you know that when you ask a specific question, something like, oh, I don't know, who shot her in the head? When you ask a specific question like that, that doesn't provide the answer. By the way, who shot her in the head doesn't provide any answer. He could have said, I don't know. He could have said, never happened. He could have said anything. But he said, Stephen did. All right. He identified who. But the very next question that they never show you, that they never play, shows the funnel approach. And what Tom Fossbender, I believe, it could be Mark, but I think it was Tom, he follows up with this question. You'll hear this question a lot. Well, tell me everything about that. Tell me what you remember about that. You go back to this very open-ended, give us a narrative. What are you talking about? And when they ask Brendan, tell us everything about that, it's Brendan Dassey who says he used the .22 caliber rifle hanging over his bed, identifies that as the murder weapon. Well, that was lucky, I guess. They certainly didn't suggest that. All they asked was, tell us everything else you know about that. He identifies the weapon. He identifies how it was used. He identifies how many shots came out of that weapon. All these things that were consistent, that were proved by ballistics, by matching evidence that that gun was used to shoot Teresa Halbach rather than or to the exclusion of any other gun in the world. Brendan Dassey happens to identify it. There's other questions when asked about the breaking up bones and scattering them about, when Steve told Brendan that he had done that. All right, when they were wondering, well, how are these bones getting off-site, that is, in these quarry pits and around the property? Well, Stephen Avery answered that question, if anybody cared to listen. Stephen Avery said that I broke up her bones, that I shoveled them into a 5-gallon pail. He took his golf cart. He drove around and he deposited 5-gallon buckets worth of bones in the various adjacent areas around his property. He told Brendan that. He told Brendan he had done that. He even told Brendan where he had dumped some of the bones. And so when they find these bones, when Kathleen Zellner finds that there are possible human bones, or even possibly Teresa's human bones in areas that surround the Avery salvage yard, why is that nothing other than a corroboration of Brendan Dassey's statement? Why all of a sudden is this the biggest thing that's going to get Stephen a new trial? Well, that's nonsense. All Brendan is saying is, here's why those bones were there. You should find bones there of Teresa Halbach, because the guy who did it, the guy who loaded those bones, shoveled them into a bucket, who had 4 days to clean up the crime scene before the cops got there. In 4 days, he was able to clean up his trailer, the garage, the pit area, and as you know, in a very, very close sense, he almost got away with murder because of that. If he could have crushed the car on Saturday before it was found, my opinion is Stephen Avery gets away with this murder.
That concludes part 1 of my interview with Ken Kratz. Stay tuned for part 2.